Welcome, everyone. My name is Seamus Ford, and today we're interviewing Annamaria Leon, who's the co-founder of Homan Grown L3C, an innovative social enterprise in the North Lawndale neighborhood of Chicago. A certified permaculture designer and influential educator, Annamaria co-founded Permaculture Chicago Teaching Institute, where she imparts her extensive knowledge in sustainable urban agriculture. Her commitment to community development is expressed through her extensive work in bringing sustainable and edible landscape design to cities, aiming to enhance environmental sustainability and community safety. Annamaria's efforts were recognized when she was named a 2020 Chicago Peace Fellow, underscoring her dedication to fostering peace and ecological stewardship in her community. And I really, really welcome you, and thank you for being here, Annamaria.
Thank you for having me, Seamus.
That's really a pleasure. So I think what we should start with is, what is permaculture? I think everybody knows agriculture, but what is permaculture?
So, permaculture, it's been defined as permanent culture or permanent agriculture. And if you look at the indigenous cultures or even the cultures that have been around for a long time, they really have taken care of their natural resources. And permaculture was started in Tasmania, in Australia, and then by Bill Mollison and David Holmgren. And I think so I teach permaculture here in Chicago, as you said, in the Permaculture Chicago Teaching Institute. And what I tell my students is that it's really a lot of the indigenous knowledge codified by bioregions, by the best practices in each bioregion. So a lot of times I'll have, people in my class that will say this, it's like culturally appropriated. And I said, I don't think so. You could take it like that, but it's also respectfully presented in a way that is understandable for everybody and is applicable at any scale. So that's what, to me, permanent agriculture, permanent culture is. And, especially Permaculture Chicago Teaching Institute specializes in urban permaculture. We don't do anything that has to do with broad acre, nothing above 2 acres. So we really apply it on a small system scale. Um, and I also think that we focus more on the community engagement, because our property scale is quite small. Like in Chicago, our lots are 25 feet by 125 feet. So we do a lot of permaculture at that small scale, but then connecting everything in a system.
Yeah, you talk about community, and I think that's another aspect of permaculture and what permaculture is in service of. Um, how does that get expressed in a city?
Yes. So one thing I did forget to say about what permaculture is that it has a set of ethics. And so the ethics is that first you take care of the earth, and then second you take care of people, and then after that you do a fair share of the abundance that's around you. And in the city, the United Nations is saying that by 2050, 70 to 80% of the world's population is going to be in large cities. So how do you apply a systems approach to agriculture and to culture and have it be sustainable and regenerative um, in on so many levels, especially given all of the barriers in a city?
Well, this is a pretty big. I'm going to attempt a question that I think has a much bigger answer than we may have time for. But one of the things about permaculture, in contrast to traditional agriculture, is has a lot to do with how agriculture has evolved in uh, all these places in the world where we have these really, really concentrated populations. In some cases, millions of people in 5 square miles. Uh, there's been a style of agriculture that's evolved to feed everybody in those places. Anything you want to say about that versus permaculture's approach?
Yes. I'm going to say first my journey to how I got here, because I think it kind of explains a little bit of that. So I've been in corporate. I'm originally from the Philippines. My grandmother was a permaculturist before that was even a term. And she is indigenous. I mean, she came from an indigenous tribe, the ones that brought down the rice terraces. She's part of that. And so when she came to the United States, I immigrated here when I was 4.5, and my grandmother came when I was 10. And she lived with us in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And she looked around and she said, you know what? If there's a famine, nobody here is going to live. Like it was only pine trees and hostas. So she was really my first introduction to permaculture. So she put in fruit trees and she started a garden, and she put that garden a little farther from the house, but then she taught me how to like plant, how to weed, how to look at the moon and try to understand the weather from the moon patterns, and feeling the humidity in the air, looking at the ants. Don't you see the ants? Like she would say, don't you see the ants? They're going around like crazy. It's gonna rain. Or she'd look at the moon and she'd be like, you know what? It's gonna like snow tomorrow. But she really had me be connected. And I think that that's one thing that agriculture, traditional agriculture here in the United States at a corporate level has gotten us divorced from who we are as human beings, right? With our food. And so I was in corporate for a long time. And then I said, I am wanting more in life. And I was working for this company that was we were sending out instruments that detected microbial contamination and a lot of like chemicals to detect that. And I said, this can't be what the world is about. And so I got downsized and I took all that money and I recreated myself. And I took um, a master gardener's class with the Illinois Extension. And I said, okay, this is great, but there has to be something more because it's like, what is this thing called urban agriculture? So then I took my permaculture class. I got my certification, and my teachers were Rhonda Baird, Peter Bain, and Keith Johnson. And they brought me to their lots. We studied in their lots in Indiana. It was magnificent. I mean, I remember walking into their food forest and seeing how their grapes were strung out along these trellises, and the way that they filtered their water through these basins so that by the end of it, it was the gray water became potable. And so I saw something on a small scale, and then I said, what is this thing called urban ag? And then I got my certification in sustainable horticulture, sustainable urban agriculture, and I didn't like it. I said, this is a lot of work, taking annual crops, putting them into straight rows, and then we'd have to like weed everything because there was no like what do they call that? Like companion planting. There was none of that. So there was all these weeds coming up. We had to keep everything like beautiful according to a certain way of looking. And then we would cut the plants. We would have to walk half a block in a wheelbarrow and then, put it into a compost bin. And this was over and over. There was no shade because according to the rules in the city, you can't have trees that shade your plants because a bird might alight on the branch and poop on the vegetables, and then you might get E. coli. It's just like, okay, I get all of that, but it was something I didn't like. And then I would come home to my food forest and sit down under the shades of the elderberry or the serviceberry and pick my pear and eat my strawberry and just relax. And I said, this is what I want. This is what I want. And so that's how I started. And then I became the edible landscapes director for a pretty large company here in Chicago, Christie Weber Landscapes. That time they were a $55 million company. And I started applying permaculture to urban ag. Not successful. I found that landscaping and permaculture are not compatible because we leave all the organic matter on the ground. We chop and drop. We take the branches and we cut them in. I cut them into small pieces and put them on the pathway, so that way you're not like it's a cushion to protect the microherds that are in the soil. And I would tell the people that I was working with, okay, don't remove any of the organic matter. Leave it there. I want it there. And they'd be like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'd leave, go to another project. I'd come back. Everything was clean. Everything was super clean. All the organic matter gone. Everything cut to like with their shears, you know? And so I, I had to leave that. And so that's when I started my own company, Homan Grown. And I also needed to pull back a little bit on urban ag and make it more accessible as a as a way to live, not just something to do. Because yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Well, one of the things about Chicago, and I happen to live in Chicago as well, is Chicago is a very, very large city. It's the third largest city in the United States, and it has, until recently, had over 10,000 acres of vacant land, land that was once had buildings, had a use and was derelict. And certain neighborhoods in particular have a lot of that land. And that's where a lot of this activity is happening now. And North Lawndale is one of those.
Yes.
How did you end up in North Lawndale?
So I took a wrong turn on the highway. And then I was like, what is this place? It was gorgeous, gorgeous. The gray stones and the winding boulevards. That was, I think it was by I forgot the famous architect that created it. But anyway, I just thought this is fantastic. And I did see all of the vacant lots. But because I had my permaculture training, my permaculture eyes, it was not a blight to me. It didn't appear to me as a eyesore. To me, it represented opportunity. And there's this concept in permaculture called edge, the edge. It's where two different environments meet. And North Lawndale is one of those environments that are really, it's been disinvested, but it's right beside the Illinois Medical District too, which has a high level of investment over there. And I actually enjoy being in this marginalized edge community because it allows for more creativity. Um, so like I can't do what I do here, with the hugelkultur. So hugelkultur is where you take the branches or any type of carbonaceous matter and you dig a hole, kind of like what you see on the screen, but those are bulbs. And then you put the different size sticks and logs in there, and then it's like lasagna gardening. And then you just put in like a foot of soil, and then it becomes an in-place composting. So that's the other thing about permaculture that I loved is if you have too much of something that you consider pollution, it's just because we haven't um, put it in a way, in a system that is actually advantageous, right? So we have a lot of grass clippings, we have a lot of branches, we have a lot of weeds, and to me, I look at that and it's a blessing. It's like, wow, 70% water. There's no water, in the plant, right? Like you and I are made up of 60, 70% water. Well, so is the being of a plant. And so because we're in an area that's disinvested, we don't have any water. People don't want to give you access to their water because water is expensive here. And so for me, I look at taking weeds and putting them around the bases of trees that I just planted as an irrigation system. So again, it's like this new way of thinking. Did I even answer your question?
Oh, you
I
have.
don't
You have.
remember.
You've led to another question. Uh, there you are in North Lawndale, and one of the other mission you have is cultivating community.
Mm.
And I invite you to say a little bit more about how these practices are having an impact on North
Mm.
Lawndale and the 16th Street corridor, I believe, is one of the places where some of your projects are.
Yeah, I have several projects. So this one right here that you see on the screen, that's called the Gravel Garden. And that one was actually in collaboration with Chris Abraham and Leo Bowler on 72 Seasons. And this is what you see here. This is a food forest. So you can go in here. This was a vacant lot. Before we got on here, it was 25 years of just a vacant lot, only grass filled with trash. This is a green infrastructure here. So these are designed to take 10,000 gallons of water per minute. And this was a $7.5 million project. And this is another view of it. And why we wanted to have this. So you can see kind of the rocks that go through it in this little acequia that channel that goes through. We really wanted to have the kids be able to go through those lots and be able to touch the plants, be able to see the butterflies and the pollinators up close. And if you see that, that's a Buddha head that was part of the 10,000 Ripples Peace Project. And their art inside of these food forests, it promotes conversation. So I think that permaculture is an in, it's a base to be able to start creating community. And I think art is also a way to get people into the garden. So in my community, there are a lot of vacant lots, and because it's primarily African American community, the idea of gardening or growing food had a negative context. It has a negative context due to the history of slavery. And then it was also like considered menial work. In our country, we don't really have a gardening culture, not like in Europe or even in Asia. There's a big garden culture, but it's mostly food. I think Europe is a lot more, besides food, it's
Okay.
also ornamental, right? And so these are some of the things that we contend with. And gardening is always associated, at least in our neighborhoods, with gentrification. Like, oh, you're bringing in people not from the community. Now you're beautifying our community. And the conversation that I've started and that I believe is impacting is that beauty is for everybody. It's not, you're just not beautifying something to have land elevate in price so that now you're going to get taxed out and you have to leave where your family has been for generations. And I think that that is also a conversation about it's false, like growing food, making things beautiful, having artistic things, then raises property values, makes it more desirable. You have to leave. And then, more affluent people come in.
Well,
That
if you draw,
starts talking about invisible structures.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's a direct analogy to agriculture and permaculture. The kind of the presumed way that things go in uh, neighborhood development in a lot of U.S. cities is a certain class of people move in because the housing is cheap and make improvements. Property values begin to rise, and the original residents can no longer afford to live there, and it's kind of taken as a given. You could say that I mean, what you're saying, I can hear that's a lot like agriculture, the annual kind of thing. Like a neighborhood has to just, have this kind of rolling cycle. And, the neighborhoods in Chicago, you can name them from the 1950s all the way to now, how that kind of happened across different parts of the city. Whereas what you're arguing for is that you can have permaculture in the community
Yeah. You can have
and have,
permanent culture in the community. And I love what you just said because you're right. You know, the soil is where we're from, right? So if the soil, we always say in permaculture that you can see the health of the community by the health of the soil. And if you have dead soil because of cars that have been on these empty lots and people pouring toxic chemicals on the soil, it's not a good place to live. Nobody wants to live there, or that area gets devalued. It's not valued. And then all of a sudden, when you start making the soil healthy and the industry starts coming in, that beauty has to come. Mother Nature is does never wants to be naked. She always wants to be clothed. Why? Because she has to protect the microherds in the soil, those microorganisms. So we have to rethink, I think, the way we interact with the soil, with the environment around us. And that's also another part of the food forest concept, where you have 8 layers, at least here in the temperate climate. So in temperate climate, we have our overstory trees and we have our understory trees and shrub layer and ground cover. I also add sedges here and bulbs and vines and perennials. And if we had every layer at least edible to something or to someone, you start having these very healthy communities and people don't want to move. They don't want to move. And then they also become desirable. Because I think once we get out of survival, once people are out of survival, everything around us thrives. People want to come to that.
Well, say a little bit more about how these spaces shift people's behavior. A word that you
Mhm,
used, I can't remember if it was when we were talking before, since we've been talking, um, the built environment,
mhm.
for people that don't know what that is as a concept or a distinction, what is the built environment?
Yeah,
Particularly,
so it's the houses that we live in, it's the streets that we live on, it's the piping underground, it's really the things that make a city. The all of the piping underneath the streets. Is it asphalt? Is it concrete? The style of housing, the where are we on a grid pattern? Like in Chicago, we're on a grid pattern, right? So our everything is facing a certain way. Whereas if you are in a built environment that's based more on facing the sun, being able to follow the sun, it's actually more energy efficient. It's it's more biophilic, right? And so in the built environment, at least in Chicago, it's harsh. It's a harsh built environment.
and the
Everything is
built environment
25 by 125. And sorry, go ahead.
and the built environment calls all like we're responding kind as humans in built environments,
Hmm.
impacts our behavior and our relationship with one another.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad we do have zoning. Like I think zoning is good. Otherwise, everybody would just do whatever they'd want to do. But zoning has kind of follows a capitalistic kind of thinking, where all of the money comes to downtown. And at least this is how it is in Chicago, right? All the money is downtown, and then in the other wards around the city, there's an unequal distribution of funding. Um, so yeah, the built environment has a lot to do with it. And so it's also harsh, the bricks, the cement, and that causes the heat island effect. So having these green structures or these green vacant lots with 8 layers of vegetation that cools the environment up to 3 to 5 degrees. It's really amazing. And yet we have what I keep referring to as like the invisible structures, which is zoning laws, laws on forestry, how high your plants can go. Um, if you have a plant that's 3 feet, more than 3 feet tall, in Chicago, you can get fined. And they fought for a long time to get that resolved. So now you can grow plants, but if you were ever to be fined, you would have to show the city that these are real plants. They're not weeds. So there's a whole education that has to happen with people in general.
One of the things that you and I have in common is we both led a particular program at Landmark called the Self-Expression Leadership Program, which, for anybody that's not familiar with Landmark or that program, is about taking a possibility or a vision or a commitment that you have and designing a project around that commitment to have an impact in the community and also to shift the way that people relate to you. And
Mm.
curious how your background with that program comes into play in impacting the conversations that are taking place in your community.
I have to say, I'm so glad I did that program because the one thing about self-expression leadership program is you create the project and then you give it away to the community so that it has a life of its own. And that is the part that I think is very difficult for a lot of people, including myself. You know, and I'm also known in the community as a go-to person. If you need anything in the greening area, go to Annamaria because I'm known as that possibility. I'm the commitment that I created for myself in the world is to have landscapes that work for everyone and everything, and that people are surrounded by beauty and they're self-expressed. So, given that that's my commitment, I can go into any situation. And if somebody wants boxwoods and grass, I can create that. I can support them in that. If they want a food forest, I can do that. If they want a complete annual, urban ag kind of set up, I can do that too. But not me. It's like I'll bring in everybody. I'll bring in everybody. And my ego, I would say, has gone down a lot. It's almost pretty much disappeared, actually, because giving your project, it's giving away the possibility of your project. And when I see people's eyes light up because they had this vision, especially in a disinvested community for so long, I'm sure you've seen this over and over, Seamus. People they long to have their vision realized. And if somebody can come along and just say, okay, what do you want? What do you need? And then you can call people in that have the soil, that have, extra this and know-how of that. And then all of a sudden they realize it. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Well, let's do a thought experiment.
Yeah.
Let's just pretend you're walking down uh, 16th Street, and there's a group of young guys. They're hanging out, they're talking, and they have no interest in gardening, farming, agriculture. They buy their food at the store, but they want to know why this crazy lady is doing it. What's your answer?
Because I love it. And look, and then this is what has happened sometimes. I say, what do you see? I had this person um, say, so this is 16th Street in particular is tough. 16th Street was owned really by a gang. I'm not going to say who they are, still there. They're in the past. They're really fighting for what used to be there. And 16th Street is also where Dr. King stayed for a summer. So there's a lot of history there, and people want things to stay the same. And in particular, there's some lots that, had their clubhouses from the past, and they don't want them to change. But change is coming. And so what I would say to them is, what do you see? What do you want? We want our history to be told. Okay, let's incorporate that. So I bring in somebody who understands that history, who has a background in museum studies, so that now they're going to do a whole, and this is real, they're actually doing a whole exhibition on this particular street gang. Okay. And then I also have to bring in somebody else who is, I shouldn't, I'm going to say it anyway, who looks like them. Okay. And I would also say I'm not a religious person and I live in a religious community, very religious community. So I need to bring somebody who has the listening of the people. So sometimes the leadership, the questions to ask, it's just an opening. But then once I hear what it is that they really want, I can bring in the people who can make that difference for them. And I can stay in the background. And then I can also go to the foreground when my skills are needed. I'm not always needed in a particular way. There's lots of different needs that people have. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely does.
It's
The thing that you said is people have a vision. People in disinvested neighborhoods have a vision for their life just the same as anybody else. And what I hear is you're expressing interest in that vision and committed to creating something that's inclusive of that vision.
Mhm.
And that's kind of a seismic shift in what people typically expect. from, really a stranger,
Yeah.
much less somebody who's, causing all this activity in their community, in their neighborhood. Let's talk
I,
a little bit of,
I want to
yeah,
say something to that too, because that is one of the things about community activism that is very difficult. It's not all, oh, let's plant a rose and people are going to love it. Everybody has an idea of what is a garden. And so you see these generational stratas where older generations, they come from the 1950s with the foundational plantings in the front and grass. Like that was considered success. And then you start moving into the now, where it's more naturalistic planting, where you have natives versus non-natives, or nativars versus, full native, or, then you have the laws again. So it's quite a complex process actually to have a community garden. And there are people who only want houses but yet they spout, we say a lot of catchphrases, the well-being, the mental health, the physical health, the it's like the catch-all phrase now. That's the trendy phrase, the mental health and the mental well-being of our neighborhoods. But yet when you start to put in greenery, it brings up so much for people, so much like stratification. It's very interesting. The kids that are 12 years old and under, they love it. They love this wild naturalistic planting, but it's the parents or some of the older leadership in the city that's like, no, 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 that's rat infested, keep everything flat and clean, spray everything in sight, So I think that that is a difficult part of gardening and community activism.
one of the things that is, we're at a point in time for the way we live as a human civilization. You referenced earlier about how many people are going to be living in cities in the next 20 years. And we've got this legacy form of agriculture that really, you know, I mean, I know people that work in that field. They really are trying to feed people. They care about people's well-being, and they're kind of running as fast as they can to improve crop yields. And it's a whole other conversation, but just the consequences of traditional agriculture are kind of a blank check that's been signed, and some of those things are coming to be collected. And yet we have to take care of the people that are here. We have to take care of the people. You talk about the difficulty in moving the conversation over something as simple as a community garden. What are we facing in creating a truly sustainable, renewable way of feeding ourselves as the population of the planet continues to increase?
Um, this is a really good question. I mean, who has answers, right? But we can inquire.
Yeah.
So when I look at urban agriculture or just agriculture in general, I think the statistics are now that at least 40% of what we grow um, goes to waste. Like they're left in the fields. 20, let's say even 20% is left in the fields to rot, right? And then by the time it gets to the consumer, I think like 30%, they said, goes into the compost bin. So do we need to, and there's a couple things, how much do we actually need to grow? And what are we actually growing? You know, and do we need to feed the world? That's a big logo. Or how do you say that? Just do it. What do they call that? Isn't it a logo? A motto. We feed the world. Do we need to feed the world? Because I don't think so. I think people are capable of creating their own agricultural systems that work for themselves, work for them in their bioregion, in their climate. And we could definitely share the abundance um, across bioregions. But we don't need to take our temperate climate ways of doing agriculture and bring it down to a tropical climate. destroy their ecosystem for wheat or, it just doesn't make any sense. Um, and if we look at also where we're growing the food, can we empower the local people there to grow it in a way that is sustainable for them? There's so much great work happening in India. That's what I love. If you look at I think Andrew Millison, his work or his documentaries are so good. They give you so much hope. But we don't have that type of documentation of what we're doing in a temperate climate. We have a lot in we have a lot of permaculture videos in from Australia, from India, but we don't have a lot in the United States, and I think that that's an area that we could get better at.
Well, I think the thing that really is the important thing you said is that it's about the questions. There aren't
Mm,
answers about it. It's going to be unique in every place. And the way that we solve it and the way that we make the transitions to whatever, this is all going to look like 100 years from now are yet to be revealed and discovered. But what would you say the questions are that people listening want to be engaged in as they
mm.
look at this whole question about how we're going to feed ourselves in 100 years?
Wow, what would be a question? I would say rethinking what we eat. What are we eating? Why are we eating this? What do we actually need? What do we actually need? What do we really stopping to think? If I were to look at how I would want to eat, I would want to eat locally. I'd want to eat food that's natural, or in the in cycles. But if I actually look too, I eat a lot of greens. Like, what do I really eat? I eat a lot of greens, so can I support that um, locally? And how do I go back to um, how can I support local people? I think that's already the questioning there, but as a one-on-one, like to myself, what do
Yeah,
I
well,
really need?
I hear two very powerful questions. Why do I eat what I eat? What do I eat? And why do I eat it? Because there may be answers to that that really have never been examined.
Hmm. Yeah.
A statistic that people may not be aware of is that in the United States, there's the most acreage of anything that's grown as a crop in the United States is lawn. 19 million acres of lawn are grown in the United States.
Mhm.
And the amount of effort that it takes to maintain that and take care of it and the energy required for that. And that's that's just one question. But if you look at what you eat, why you eat it, so I hear that question. And then the other question that I hear is, what's my role?
Mm.
Like, what's my role now?
Yes. Like, what can I really impact? I have a friend who is really working with Al Gore, his group, his Climate Reality Project, and on the Farm Bill. It's quite complex, but it's really simple at the same time. Follow the money. Follow the money.
Or you can say, where's the incentive right now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's um, another thing too to ask yourself. When I asked myself, what do I really need? I remember when I had a peach tree. The first time I really looked at a peach tree, there was so many peaches. It kind of was stressful for me because I wanted to get every peach because I thought it's going to go to waste. And then when I could not get every peach, I just kind of gave up. And then I sat down and then I came back, right? 2 days later, there were no peaches on the ground. I could not find one peach on the ground. And then as I sat there, because one of the principles of permaculture is you sit and you observe. I sat down for 20 minutes inside my food forest And I started looking at everything. And do you know what happened to those peaches? They were, they were eaten by the possums, by the squirrels, by the birds. And then I looked down and there were ants that were eating all of the peaches. And I said, there is no waste. I needed to decommoditize my brain. I need to decommoditize my thoughts. And then I realized, what does that mean to have waste? That word. We call all this stuff litter, like those branches right there, those stumps right there. That's like considered litter, and you want to throw them away. There's no connection. I started to really get connected to what was going on around me. And that's how I remember my grandmother. She was like, don't you see the ants? Don't you see the moon? Don't you see the, you
Mhm.
know, you there's this whole thing about neuroaesthetics now, where when you create wonder in the brain, like it actually changes the physical, um, the physicality of your brain. So that's another thing. What are you wondering?
Mm,
That could be another question. Wonder.
great. Well, this conversation wants to go on and on and on and on and
It
on.
could, yeah.
We don't have that much time. And I really want to thank you for being with us. And I also thank you for your humility and your compassion and your commitment to thinking outside of the box
Thanks, Seamus.
and, and the fundamental difference that it's obvious that you want your life to make and it's making. So thank you very much for being here, Emily.
Thank you.